Not a matter of if, but when crisis will rock your world. I'm Roshini Rajkumar, crisis strategist, licensed attorney, and host of The Crisis Files. In each case file, we explore a ripped-from-the-headlines controversy. My Crisis Squad and I seek solutions. Crisis Squad member Steve Silton is in the studio. He's our guy on the law, a business, entertainment, and sports attorney with Cozen O'Connor, a national law firm based in Philadelphia. Steve is here for the case file I call Sports and Gambling. Steve, there's so much money in the sports arena right now. We're really talking about the marriage of money and sports. And sometimes headlines about athletes getting in trouble for betting on games. Should fans be worried?
I don't know if fans should necessarily be worried. And it's not really the marriage of money and sports. Money has always been in sports, and sports has primarily been about money, at least in our lifetime. This is really about the marriage of gambling and sports, which is a rather new institution when it comes to the United States. And if I can take us back to 1992, maybe that's where the story starts, Roshini.
All right. What happened in 1992 that's relevant today?
In 1992, the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act was passed, also known as the Bradley Law, named after Bill Bradley, who was a former NBA player and collegiate player. Ironically, his nickname in college and the pros was Dollar Bill Bradley. So I think that was more to do with how money he was as opposed to his relationship
So
with
he was really
gambling.
about money when he was playing.
His shots were money. He was a clutch player.
Got it.
He was
Okay.
a clutch player.
Get that.
But when he became a U.S. Senator, he very much took as one of his pet projects sports gaming because he saw the danger of the connection of sports and gambling. And in many respects, particularly when it came to collegiate sports, when the players weren't getting paid, they were particularly targeted by professional gambling because they weren't getting paid. People were making a lot of money off them in gambling, and they could be targeted to throw games. And there was a lot of scandals, particularly prior to 1992 and really prior to the current NAL that involved amateur sports and gambling. But this essentially outlawed sports gaming. And for about 26 years, sports and gambling weren't connected in any way, shape, or form.
It was a big deal, right? I mean, we would be just shocked and stunned and saddened when our favorite athletes were accused and turned out, in some cases, to be guilty of this gambling.
For sure. And it goes back to early part of the 20th century. You obviously had the 1919 Black Sox scandal where the Chicago White Sox and shoeless Joe Jackson were accused and actually convicted of throwing the World Series against the Cincinnati Reds. And you had a whole litany of scandals that essentially led up to this 1992
I think of Pete
law.
Rose.
Well, for
Pete
sure.
Rose. That's the name that really, sadly for him, has become synonymous with gambling of those days.
Right. Probably one of the greatest baseball players of all time, still not in the Hall of Fame, despite the fact that he was never accused of gambling on his own team. And most of the gambling related to teams that he was not affiliated either playing against or obviously with. And it's interesting because he's kind of in the last stages of his life, and he just did a big documentary on HBO, which was very good, by the way. Clearly, he's trying to burnish his own image so that he can wind up in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, well, that would be a good one to check out for people. All right, so help us understand the different layers of this. We hear about FanDuel. What is FanDuel doing, and are they doing it in a good way, a positive way, a legal way?
Absolutely. And now, moving on from 1992, we have to go to 2018 and a Supreme Court case. We're very legal here today, Roshini.
We are. Well, you're our guy on the law, so
Yeah.
if we're going to be legal, it's got to be with you.
Murphy versus the NCAA, where the Supreme Court on a 6-3 ruling overruled the Bradley Act. So now sports gaming is entirely legal. Now, of course, prior to that, sports gaming was still around. Everybody still had, their brackets when it came to the NCAA. That was kind of a somewhat decriminalized. People accepted that. It wasn't illegal. But now you have full legality of sports gaming. And immediately you have implications by that, right? You have in 2020, the University of Colorado, and again, this is before Deion Sanders, cut a deal with Denver-based PointsBet, which was a gaming website. You start having sports books put in arenas. Capital One Arena in Washington was the first professional sports arena with the fully operational sports book. You essentially have the marriage between sports and gambling, almost a formal type of marriage.
So it really does become a marriage, and it did. And you can look to, I love that you're taking us through the legal landscape of this. It didn't just pop up one day.
No, it did not. It was a very deliberate attempt by professional teams and leagues to gather another profit source.
And how does that work when we think about each of the teams? You name the sport: football, baseball, hockey, basketball, cricket. I mean, how can it work, and does it work currently?
Well, there's a number of ways it works, right? You obviously have gaming purely on the outcome of particular events. But obviously sports gaming, particularly with, the internet and FanDuel and DraftKings and ESPN doing all this, it's becoming way more complicated on a very micro level. You have all these proposition bets, they call it, on everything from coin flips to who gets the first down to who gets the first field goal.
Yeah, we hear about that every year with the Super Bowl. Like, what is the quarterback going to be? What color underwear is he wearing? I mean, that kind of stuff, it gets pretty crazy.
Yeah, how long the national anthem's going to be, right? All of these very, very granular and obscure type issues. And they all relate to what's called a parlay, which is when you stack bets together. Instead of just betting on the win or loss, which is generally if you bet $10, you get $10. You bet on the coin flip, the win and loss, how many yards the quarterback gets. And when you stack those bets together, you can make a $10 bet equal thousands of dollars.
Right. Otherwise, it's really a zero-sum game, right? Because win or lose, there are only two outcomes there.
Correct. So this creates the many different outcomes, and it also creates the concept of live betting, which is a fairly new institution where you can bet on a game throughout the process of the game. Usually, when you went to a sports book, you bet, the Minnesota Vikings to win, and you got paid essentially, whatever you bet.
If you're a Vikings fan, as you and I are, we have to be honest, disclose that.
Right, homers like us. But now you could bet the Vikings to win at the beginning of the game, and after the first quarter, if the Vikings were down by 7 points, you could bet them to win again and actually get better odds. So you can make bets throughout the entirety of the game.
Are you losing when you change bets, though?
No, but you don't lose until the end of the game. So if you bet $10 at the beginning of the game, $10 first quarter, $10 at halftime, $10 third quarter, what is that, a $40 bet? But if they wind up winning, you can wind up getting different odds on each of those $10 bets. It's a fascinating algorithmic type of a process. It also keeps people engaged in the gambling aspect of it. And frankly, it has long-term implications. What you're doing is you're essentially turning sports gaming into something akin to a slot machine.
Right, and that's what I want to get into. Of course, on the Crisis Files, we look at the dark side of things. I mean, this has addiction written all over it, has a lot of other kinds of scandals written all over it. So let's explore some of the downside.
What essentially you've taken is a fairly, I don't want to say vanilla practice of gaming on outcome-based events, and you've turned it into a ongoing, exciting.
Well, it's like a joyride.
It is.
I mean, it's a rush, like you're doing a drug.
100%. And there's no doubt that makes it way more susceptible to addiction and other issues. And it also makes it problematic when it comes to the players. And you have this proliferation of players starting essentially in 2018 of being suspended for gaming. And some of the gaming isn't always, again, the outcome-based, traditional throwing a game. It relates to gaming on how many yards you're going to get, because there's a marriage not only of teams and gambling, there's a marriage of fantasy sports, right? Which was essentially a separate way of gambling on sports. And stadiums have been built in order to accommodate this kind of appetite for gambling and for fantasy sports, right? They make sure that they've got good Wi-Fi. Some of the seats have their own screens. They've constantly got fantasy results being broadcast on television, on ESPN or
Which
whatever
is just
it is.
like when I think about the stadiums of our childhood, to now be able to sit in a seat, and it's an interactive seat, fully equipped and hot, so to speak. I mean, that's kind of amazing. I'm glad you brought up stadiums because I want to ask you about that. I am hearing there are major firms, major hedge funds, investors investing in these stadiums because they see there's a lot of money to be had. So break that down for us.
Well, you needed to essentially change the fan experience in sports, period. Because as technology got better when it came to broadcasting, the home experience of watching sports became way and way and way better. With, HDTV and these big screens, you're watching football in a way that, in some respects, makes it the home experience almost as good and in some respects better than a live experience. So the teams needed to adapt there. And using gambling, frankly, allowed them to create this kind of interactive experience at the stadiums. And the stadiums are being built for that, right? It really started with these loge boxes in basketball and hockey about 10 years ago. And it's expanded with all these new high-tech stadiums. U.S. Bank has this unbelievable kind of Wi-Fi system that really makes the in-seat experience.
That's the U.S. Bank Stadium in
US
Minneapolis.
Bank Stadium, yes.
And I'm guessing lots of stadiums are like that around the United States.
Right, and they're being built more and more like that. The stadiums are getting smaller in terms of capacity and way more robust and complicated in terms of technology.
So that does mean ticket prices go up.
Well, for sure. Yeah, I mean, ticket prices have been going up. That's another topic altogether. We could talk about how fan experiences have kind of eclipsed most people's ability to go, which I think is negative to sports as a whole, because sports was always something that brought people together despite their class and ethnic differences. Well, when essentially you have to be a corporation or very wealthy to buy a football ticket, that's not, in my opinion, a good thing.
But you really hit it on the head when you said stadiums, teams were competing with the home experience, because the home experience got so much better, and you're in the comfort of your own home too, which matters to some people. So they needed to make these souped up stadiums, and it does make sense. Go a little smaller. You don't care then that you have empty seats, but every seat you have is valuable. But yes, I'm saddened by the fact it makes these professional sports games and others, even amateur sports games and concerts, less accessible for people.
And I always thought that cities should be smart when they're providing public money for these stadiums to essentially enforce a certain amount of the tickets can only be sold the day of the game and have to be sold at a well
Reasonable
below
price.
Premium, trying to take out ticket brokers and allowing anybody who is a fan to experience a live event at least once or twice a year. And I've never seen a city do that, though I always thought that would be really, really smart in the negotiations with the teams, because almost all of them, with a few very specific exceptions, are public-private partnerships. In other words, the governments are providing either significant tax incentives or significant funding to the team, so they do have some leverage in negotiating those issues.
So we're talking here in August of 2024, and I always like to ask you when you come in studio, because you are, like, to me, the ultimate sports fan. You have been to so many different kinds of sports, the biggest game days of the big for those sports. What's still on your bucket list?
As you said, I've been very fortunate to have really good relationships with my clients who've given me access to some of the more unique experiences. I would say, and I know you're a tennis fan as well, I would like to go to Wimbledon and the French Open. Those are unique sporting events that I've yet to experience. I've yet to be, though I've been to a number of Ryder Cups, I've yet to be to a foreign Ryder Cup. I'd like to be American as a minority in a foreign country while the U.S. is playing against Europe in golf. You know, I didn't have any FOMO in this Olympics, ironically, though the funny thing is my wife did. She has been watching the Olympics kind of compulsively. So I would say those are mine. What are yours?
Well, you are so right. I am a tennis fan. The annual U.S. Open trip this year, 2024, will be mine and Dr. Laura's, one of my best friends from college, our 10th U.S. Open together. And I have to thank my brother because it's his ticket privileges that get us these really great seats. I mean, sure, we could go buy our own tickets, but why when we have Rashawn's great access, which is, thanks to my brother. Shout out to him. I have been to Wimbledon, but I went when I was studying abroad, so I was a student. You get the cheap seats at the end. But again, to your point, they were available. I could walk in day of and buy cheap tickets to center court, because it was day of, morning of, whatever. I would love to go back to Wimbledon and really have great seats, right? Not nosebleeds. I would love to do the French Open, and I'm hoping for, within the next couple of years, to get to the Australian Open. And that's a January tournament. And of course, it's summer there when that happens. I have never been to a live Super Bowl, and you've been to many. So there are so many things, and I think one of the reasons we continue to cover sports on the Crisis Files, not only because there are controversies, for sure, and that's always fun to talk about and dissect with you, but really, they are such community spirit and country building, nation building, city building, even school district building kind of events. So I really hope sports, as we knew them as children, don't totally go away from the landscape.
Well, I don't think they will. Obviously, the power of sports to bring communities together has been shown time and time again. You can go back to the Yankees games after 9/11, where despite the fact the Yankees are probably the most hated MLB franchise, Everybody was rooting for the Yankees at that point. You can go to the Ryder Cup. You can go to the Olympics. There truly are unique aspects to it. And I think that it is really important. You make an excellent point that keeping sports democratic, right, allowing everybody access should be a primary goal of the leagues, at least, if not the number one goal, should be in their top three. One of the great sports experiences, which is really accessible to almost anybody, in my opinion, is the first week of the U.S. Open. There's more tennis played in the first week than there is at the later dates. You can walk from court to court. The tickets are...
It's like 16 courts, and you're so close on some of those smaller courts to your favorite stars, as well as the up-and-comers.
100%. And the ticket prices are generally below $100 a piece. You can be there for 12 or 14 hours. You get to see top players in the world and in one of the great tennis facilities I've ever seen.
On the globe.
Phenomenal experience.
And I will say this, if I had only had the opportunity to go once, I'm so blessed that this will be my 10th time in 2024. The U.S. Open tennis is one of the best events of any sport, anywhere. Every person should experience it. It is like a model UN, United Nations right there, because you hear all these different languages, you see all different kinds of people, and they're in harmony, brought together. Whether you're a longtime fan or don't even like tennis, you have a good time at that thing. And it is really, that US Open facility is amazing. And the retractable roof was a great addition a few years ago. That makes it even more fun. Steve, as always, thanks for your insights. Connect directly with Steve on LinkedIn at Steven Silton. Today's Crisis Brief is brought to you by Mall of America. Number 1. Currently, sports betting is legal in 38 states. Each state, however, has different layers of what's allowed. Number 2. Sports gambling is becoming a profit center unto itself, both for the gaming sites and the teams themselves. Number 3. Sports bring communities together. Be sure to check them out or play where you live. An international destination for more than 30 years, the Mall of America continues to draw millions of guests from around the world. But the mall is so much more than shopping. Events, activations, and attractions continue to delight guests of all ages. They're also a strong supporter of the community and nonprofit organizations. Go to mallofamerica.com to find out more. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at The Crisis Files. Rate, review, and subscribe to The Crisis Files on your platform of choice. Check out our website, thecrisisfiles.com, to catch up on all case files in one easy spot. I'm Roshini Rajkumar. Join me next time on The Crisis Files.